ahead and start recording the session because a couple of people had conflicting commitments and wanted to be able to go back and use it as a reference. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to be covering some tips about how to round out the term and kind of get everything in order that you might need to submit to deans or banner or things like that. And at the end of today's session, I am going to paste a link in the chat for you guys to be able to give us feedback on what was helpful in the session or, other things that we might need to go over in more detail. I do intend to take this session very slowly so that, if you have questions, there'll definitely be time to ask them. And I've reserved the last 10 or so minutes for Q&A as well. Mark, Cameron, do you guys want to introduce yourselves as well?
Sure, I'm Cameron, and I'll be glad to answer any questions in the chat column while Abby's giving all her important info. If y'all want to type in any questions. Good to see everybody.
And hello everybody. Mark, the instructional design specialist, which everybody knows me. But feel free to ask any questions you have of me as well.
I told them to introduce themselves, but I don't think I actually said who I am. I'm Ashley Strong-Green. I'm the distance ed coordinator and a recently removed English instructor. So today what we're really going to focus on are the gradebook tools and the attendance tools, both Quickly and the Blackboard attendance tools, how to export some of those things, and then maybe 2 or 3 tricks to help organize those file formats in Excel as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my webcam off and share my screen with you guys so that you can see the stuff I'm talking about. Now it'll be so obscure. There we go. So can everybody see my screen right now?
Yes.
All right. So to start with, I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about some of the things that you see in the Full Grade Center and, some ways that you might be able to go in and make your lives a little bit easier. The Full Grade Center is essentially your grade book. It's got everything that you need kind of already there. If you find that you need to add additional information in for maybe potentially a physical assignment that students were doing, like a pop quiz, you can always very easily do that by clicking the Create column. When you do that, a lot of people end up having questions about, well, it counted for 5 points, but it's 100%, or I don't see this the way I'd like for it to be seen. You get to choose what you name this column. If you're setting something up as a score, it's going to show the exact number of points you enter. So, if there are 20 questions on it and each question is worth 1 point, you're going to see a score of 20 or 18 out of 20 rather than a percentage. You are choosing the points possible as well, so none of that stuff is coming over from some other place if you're entering it into Blackboard. And the real challenge I think people are sometimes having is, where's it going in the gradebook? If you have it set to include that in your gradebook calculations, that's going to make exporting that information easier. This option makes sure that students can see it. And, it might not be something you want students to see. And if you want the statistics on it, by all means, turn them on. But usually that kind of complicates the view. When you click Submit, do note that those columns actually go all the way to the far right side of the gradebook. So they're going to appear over here rather than at the very front of the gradebook. So if you're looking for something and you keep saying, hey, I just built that and I don't see it, it's because it's on the right side of the gradebook. Now, one of the most frequent questions I get at the end of the term is, this stuff is not in order. Is there a way for me to change the order before I export it into Excel? And that's pretty easy to do as well. If you click Manage and then go down to column Organization, you're going to see all of the items that you have in your gradebook. So when I look at this right now, I can see that, I have attendance appearing as the last thing in my gradebook. Or, maybe I want all of the items that are labeled as practice together. If you want to rearrange things, you can drag and drop them very easily from this menu. A lot of the times people will say, hey, I know I graded this discussion board. I don't see the discussion board in my grade book. That might be a matter of something being hidden. So if I'm just going to very quickly hide these. So notice how they're italicized and they're kind of a lighter shade of gray. That means that that item is, the information for it is there, but it's not appearing where you can see it in your gradebook. So I'm just going to very quickly go back to that gradebook screen. You see how right here we see task 1 and then it drops to task hashtag. That's because I turned that column off. And if I need to see that information or if it matters, I can just go back in here very quickly and turn the show selected columns on. And now when I go back to my gradebook, the information I need is going to be visible for me right there. So if you're having issues, now we can see that there's skills 3 and task 4. So if you're having issues finding information in your gradebook, that would be the first place that I would recommend that you go, is to that column organization, and that you potentially drag and drop assignments. How you choose to order your gradebook is entirely, up to you. That's not something where just instead tells you it has to be in this way. It might be most useful for you to organize it in terms of assignments. So maybe I want all of my tests grouped together and I want all of my assignments together. It might be most useful for you to do it by the date that you made those assignments or by the date that those assignments were due. I don't actually have that information uploaded in this gradebook, but this is the easiest way to organize those columns and make them visible or invisible. Now, just so we're clear, if you make the columns invisible and you choose to export your gradebook to anything like Excel, the columns are going to go. You're just going to have to go in and actually delete them. So the other kind of useful thing about this particular menu has to do with when you have a weighted grade. Let's say all of my tests in this class count as 20% of a student's grade. So if I pull all of my tests together, and then maybe I counted this skills 3 as a test and this assignment create a rubric as a test. Well, if you go in and click on those 2 items, you can change their category to a test right here, instead of having to individually go into assignments or to go back and individually try and do those calculations. This is a really easy way to make sure everything's organized. So if I had all my discussion boards here and I wanted to make sure they were all counting towards the discussion board category, if I wanted to make sure that every test was being counted towards the appropriate category, that's a really easy way to set that information up. I'm a little harebrained, and so one of the most frustrating things for me is I would go in and I'd make those changes, and then I'd come back over here and I'd click Full Grade Center, and I wouldn't see the changes that I had just made, and I would find myself incredibly frustrated. So you really want to make sure that you're clicking Submit down in the bottom right-hand corner so that those changes are actually taking effect, because they're not going to take effect just when you make them, and you can make multiple changes in a single kind of move, but that's sort of one of those things where if you click out of it, you got to start that whole process over. And the gradebook I'm looking at right now is a very simple gradebook. There are only like 10 assignments in it, but if you've got 20 or 30 things in your gradebook and you just spend all that time organizing it, that could very easily become frustrating. So before we move out of the gradebook, the final thing I want to make sure everyone understands is how the weighted column actually works. When you are creating columns that are calculated, where we're either averaging things together or adding up the total number of points possible, you actually have 4 options. I'm hoping by this point we all know what an average is, but it's going to add all the points possible divided by the number of assignments. The minimum and maximum column allows you to pick based on a certain number of items. So like maybe my students had 10 discussion boards, and I'm going to count their highest discussion board grade as their overall discussion board grade. That's what that min-max column would do. The total column does exactly what it sounds like it does. It just adds all the points together, and I actually have a total column set up right here. So what this is doing is just kind of keeping a running tab of how many points each student in this class has. And then the weighted column is for when items may have a greater or lesser value. So when you set up a weighted column, you have to actually tell Blackboard how the weights calculate. And this is something you very likely have done at the beginning of the semester, but you definitely want to go back and check it. Sometimes people get confused because they don't understand up here you're seeing the individual items in your grade book, and down here you're seeing the actual categories for the grade book. So if you're not careful and you start mixing and matching these things, things can get very confusing, right? My suggestion would be that you go one route or the other. But you know, when you're doing this, you need to make sure that you're actually telling Blackboard the right thing. If I were to move these these 4 assignments over and tell Blackboard, well, I want these 4 assignments to count for as 25 points or 25% of the student's grade each, what that's telling Blackboard is that nothing else in that grade book actually counts towards a grade. And so if I click submit and come back to this weighted column, notice how the weighted column is very different from the total column. And actually I have the total column set to a score. So let me change it as a percentage real quick to avoid confusion. So do you see how these 2 grades are different? It's because I've told Blackboard only count those 4 assignments. If you have gone in and properly labeled assignments, so when you were looking at this column organization menu, if you've actually said, hey, these are all the things that count as tests and these are all the things that count as assignments, then it may be easier for you to set up your weighted average based on those categories. And by that, I mean I could come back into this column, and instead of using the items at the top, which were those individual assignments. So I'm going to remove these individual assignments, and I'm just going to tell Blackboard, hey, count all my assignments as 50% of the student's grade. Count all the tests as 25% of a student's grade, and then count attendance as another 25% of the student's grade. Now Blackboard's going to take everything that's labeled as an assignment and it's going to use it as that category. You have options here. You can equally weight things. The reason this would matter would probably be if you, for example, if you have tests and maybe, you know, there are 20 questions on one test and there are 10 questions on the other, but I want both those tests to count the same. That's when you'd use that equally option. You have the option to drop or add, drop lowest grades or use just the highest grades in the calculations. And all of this is relatively self-explanatory, so I'm not gonna read it to you. When you use this calculate as a running total, that just makes sure that students see things as the semester's progressing instead of getting all this kind of information at the end of the semester. And so now, when I go back to that full grade center, my weighted total is going to have significantly changed because now it's counting everything labeled as an assignment or everything labeled as a test. And definitely go back and double check your math and that math. It should very likely reflect what you already have on your syllabus. So once you have all of this ready, and you want to go ahead and export this information, the easiest way to get your gradebook out of Blackboard and into Excel is to click this work offline option and then just go to the download option. When you go to download, you need to tell it whether or not you want just 1 or 2 items or a selected item. The only reason I can imagine that a person might use the selected column is like if I just wanted to see my proctored event grade or if I just wanted to see a student's final average, but you definitely want to retain a copy of all of the grades students have outside of Blackboard because after a certain amount of time, you know, we retire your access to those courses. So we're going to click this full grade option. The comma option is going to allow you to see all of that information on a single page, and including hidden information is how I'll see the items in the gradebook that I may have turned on or off using that column organization function we just covered. So once we click submit, we're going to get the option to download the file, and it should appear as an Excel spreadsheet. This is not it, so just give it a second, it's opening up. So what we see isn't always immediately easy to understand. If you need to manipulate or change any of this information, we're going to come back to some of the tips and tricks on how to do that, but this should show you everything that you had in that gradebook. So I've heard the chat function going off. Do we have any questions before I move forward from this portion? Yes, okay, we're all set. All right, so before we start kind of talking about the Excel formatting, I do also want to take a moment to talk to you about the attendance options that you have if you've kept a record of your attendance in Blackboard, or if you'd like to upload a copy of it to make it a little bit easier. Blackboard has two tools that you can use to keep a copy of your attendance records within Blackboard. The first is the Blackboard attendance tool, and you'll find that under the course tool options. It's the fourth item down. When you use this option, Blackboard is just essentially creating a copy of your roster, and it's giving you the option to mark people as present or absent. There's an initial setup that you have to do. I'm assuming at this point in the semester, if you're using this attendance tool, that you've already set it up. But when we're clicking this meeting option, that's what Blackboard defaults to, is today's attendance. To actually export these records, you have to click this overall option and then this button that's with the right upward pointing arrow. And that again is going to create a Excel document that's going to export the records out. If you need to go back in, because one of the questions and here's an example of what those records look like. If you need to go back in and add an additional date to this version of Blackboard attendance, which is a question we get pretty frequently at the end of the semester, the way to do that, because the screen defaults on meeting, is to go to the overall option, and whatever today's attendance is, you can click the option to edit the attendance. So I'm going to change the meeting or the attendance I took today, and I'm going to make that the attendance for Monday, November 16th. Now that I've done that, it automatically saves Cameron was excused, Mark was present. Now I can back out of that menu. And then when you go back to the tool, if you need to take attendance for today, you have the option to do so. Since both Mark and Cameron are here today, I'm going to go ahead and mark them as present. And anytime you need to input extra attendance in, that's the way that you have to do it using the Black attendance tool. If you click on the settings, this is how you would come up with any of those additional options. And if you do choose to integrate this into the gradebook, you can. You don't necessarily have to. In something like an online class, it wouldn't quite make sense when you're using, the Grade Center as a way of keeping track of attendance. Any questions about this before we move to the other attendance option? Okay, just wanted to double check. I think the more popular way to take attendance for us involves using the Quickly tool. For those of you who have potentially not set the Quickly tool up, if you go to Tools, you use the More Tools option, Quickly Attendance is right here. It's going to ask you what you're doing right here is just essentially creating a link. And chances are you already have this set up if you've been using Quickly for your attendance taking. So when you use a Quickly attendance option, the advantage of using Quickly over the Blackboard attendance tool is Quickly can also allow students to enter a PIN so that they're submitting their attendance rather than you having to submit it. Like every attendance tool, it has that initial wizard, and I've already taken attendance for today. So with the Quickly attendance tool, you have to once again click the attendance records option. This right now is showing me my overall attendance. So Cameron's been present 3 times, Mark's been present 4 times. If you find, hey, I need to see the individual dates, click the records option and it'll show you the dates. If you need to go back in and add past attendance, click that take attendance option, go ahead and enter in the attendance. So Cameron's absent, Mark is present, and you can select the custom time in order to enter a past date. So I'm going to say that Cameron was absent on Tuesday, Mark was present, and that the class met at 10. And so now when I go back to my attendance record, I'm going to see that additional date has been added. Actually, I don't think I clicked submit because. And if you ever need to go back in and update it, you can update it here as well. When it's time to export these records, once again, hit the export option. If you want the student's 900 number to appear, that's when you would use that student ID option, and then just go ahead and click the download option. And these records look very different from the Blackboard attendance tool. So when you open them up, you're going to see the date and the time the information was entered. And so it'll look something like this. Now, again, I'm going to come back to how you can format this a little bit easier, but it's up to you which attendance tool you actually choose to use. The advantage of using the Blackboard attendance tools is that you're not having to constantly type out that roster. If you set this up at the beginning of the semester, which, ideally you would keep those attendance records throughout the term, you'll be able to see people as the people who may have withdrawn from your class that you might need information on or might want to have to reach out to regarding something. All that will stay in here if you set it up at the beginning of the semester. If you're not setting this up until now, it's going to integrate with the roster that you have in Blackboard, which should reflect your banner roster. All right, so now that we've got several documents that we've exported out of Blackboard, let's talk about doing in Excel to make this process a little bit easier. And right now I have several Excel documents open. Ultimately, I think the goal is for a set of grades that look similar to this. Most instructors are keeping a copy of the weight of their overall grades. They're also keeping copies of the due date. The number one question I'm asked at the end of the term is there a way to automatically get that due date for assignments in there? And unfortunately, the answer is no. If you put the due dates into assignments in Blackboard when you're setting up like tests and quizzes, that's for Blackboard's calendar and for Blackboard to be able to limit access. But there's not an easy way to export that information into an Excel gradebook. You're going to have to ultimately enter that information in. Now, the other question I get a lot of the time is, how do I get rid of some of the stuff that I don't necessarily want to see? So since this is the end result we're going for, I'm actually going to go back to the gradebook that I originally exported, which was this one. So notice with this gradebook how I can't immediately see all of what's in this first column. The easiest way to fix that is to go ahead and click on the column that you're trying to go back in and open. I am using a version of Excel that's based on 2020. So underneath cells, I'm going to choose Format Cells, and I'm going to go ahead and adjust the column width. I'm going to auto adjust it. I'm sorry, I clicked the wrong button. And that's going to show me the whole column. Now that I've done that, though, my gradebook is so big, there's no way that's going to fit on a single page or be meaningful for me. I don't want to print 12 pages worth of gradebook. So it's easiest for me to highlight that text and change its direction. You can very easily do that using this kind of diagonal pointing ABC tool. So I'm going to go back and change this so it points up, and then I'm going to go back in and change my cells so that they're based on the column width. And what that does for me is it creates a much easier space for me to see everything that my students have done. If you want to hide this information, you can. If you want to adjust the width of just 1 or 2 columns, you can go back in and do that. It's entirely up to you how you want to go back and adjust this to make it work for you. If you need to add in an additional column, so like maybe I want to go back in before I adjust this and add a column to enter in those due dates, just right click, hit insert, and now you've got a space to label in those dates. I would advise you to be very careful when you're doing this to also format this column, or excuse me, this row, so that Blackboard understands that you're putting in dates, because otherwise if you're entering in something like 01, it can get a little messy. So in the same way that you can do that for your gradebook, you can do that for any of your attendance records. You can go back in and do that if you need to make changes to, I'm going to close this gradebook. If you need to make changes to how things are named, so maybe I want to turn my midterm discussion, maybe that was my proctored event. If I need to go back in and label that as a proctored event, I can very easily add in a row to give me the information to type that data. And keeping these records as accurate as possible is important because, as we said, you know, you can go back to previous semesters in Blackboard and see your gradebook if a student has a question or if you need to look that information up for someone. But that access only goes back so far. We can't leave every course in Blackboard open throughout the entire time that you're at college. And, you know, I don't think you'd want that either because you'd see a ton of classes on your Blackboard screen. The final question that I've been receiving quite a bit via email has to do with date organization. So this is actually an example gradebook that Cameron was kind enough to share with me. And a lot of the times when people enter in dates, they enter them down a column. So if I need to filter out all of the assignments that were in January, I can just, you know, go back into a column and filter them. But when you have something set up by rows, it's a little bit more complicated. So if you're a person who, for example, has a gradebook like this, and I went back in and changed some things in this gradebook. So right now, here we have a date in April, March, April, March, January. If I wanted to see this filtered by the date, the easier way to do that when you have a row set up for the date is to go ahead and highlight all of this. If we right click it, we can go back in and filter the cells based on the date. So if you go down to filter, excuse me, hold on, let me right click. Or I'm sorry, sort. If you go down to sort, and then we select that custom sort option, what you want to do if you need to filter the row is go back and change your options and change it to sort left to right. And if this is going a little bit too fast for you, we've already taken screenshots and we're going to send out the directions on this afterwards. But now I'm going to tell it, instead of sorting up to down, sort left to right. And if you'll notice, this is the 20th row. So my due dates are my 20th row. I'm just going to go down and tell it, hey, sort by row 20. And now I can see everything through January, February, March, April. Now, why might you want to do that? Once you've got your records all set up and you've got everything that you need, this might matter for something like LDA reporting. Please remember, if you're working with students in a strictly online class, and if a student fails a course, the registrar's office asks you for the last date of attendance for the student. That last date of attendance for a student in an online class is going to be based on when they last submitted work. So if I'm trying to figure out, hey, when was the last time the student submitted work, and I don't want to have to go through each item in the grade book that was potentially organized by category or potentially organized by weight, this is an easy way to go ahead and organize that grade book by the date so that I can easily see, here's the last time that this student submitted an assignment so that I can report the LDA. And after you've got that information, if maybe you don't want to keep the grade book like this, it's a single button click to go back and change it to a way that potentially makes more sense or is more pertinent for your record organization. So those were kind of the very basic questions that we get a lot at the end of the term about how do we export this gradebook, how do we go back and see columns, how do we hide them, how can I go back and change things in Excel. Are there any questions or any tasks that you guys are trying to go back in and do that you need additional help with, or that you want to ask questions about? Okay, either I did a really great job or I did a really horrible job, and none of this information was relevant to you guys. And I'm certainly hoping for the former. All right. Well, if you don't have any questions, that was all that we had for today's session. Remember that we're always an email or a phone call away. If you're trying to get a quick response, the easiest way to I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that. Well, if you're trying to get a quick response from us, the easiest way to reach us is to send an email to the distance education inbox. It's at distanceed@augustatech.edu, and I just sent it in the chat option. That's going to get a response back much faster than sending an individual email because, again, we're all able to look at that information. If you want to give us a call, there is usually someone in our office. We're all there on Monday, so feel free to just, if it's something that can be answered very quickly, give us a call. We're happy to set up a Collaborate session to help you out. I am going to go ahead and share with you guys this feedback survey. We would love to hear more information about what you'd like more training sessions on, what was useful from this training session, what maybe we don't need to cover in future sessions. So if you've got 5 minutes, please, by all means, fill that out. And if this session is recorded, and we'll post the link to it in Blackboard for you guys. So if you have no additional questions, take care. And if you do, hang out for a couple minutes and we'll answer them and at the end of this session. Cameron, Mark, do you guys have anything you want to add to this?
Not that I can think of. That was a lot of great information. I will point out that I added the course copy instructions and the top announcement in DEIR. So after you get all of your stuff downloaded for this semester, you can go ahead and copy for next semester.
And if you are, if you know you're going to be teaching the same classes every single semester, like, maybe every semester you're teaching Econ 1101, go ahead and send us a request and we can set up a master course for you so that you can copy and build in that class and copy down from it, and you're not having to copy forward every single semester from that single class. Any other questions, guys? Mark, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I don't have anything to add about this. Great presentation. I might make an announcement about our community of practice coming up next week. And just to give everybody a little bit, a tidbit, a community of practice is just kind of a group where people come together to study whatever they want to. And since we're all kind of doing online learning, I went ahead and suggested a video for the next session. We're watching a video on how to increase student engagement in the online classroom. So whoever wants to come to the session, the great thing would be to watch the video first and then come. It's just a discussion. You can kind of add your thoughts on the video. And you also have a lot of insights about, like, well, how does the tips of video apply to your discipline? So I look forward to hearing from everybody's perspective in that, their take on those tips and how, yeah, their discipline interacts with those things to increase student engagement. And at the session, we'll also take suggestions from you guys if you have what other topics you want to explore, because the curriculum of a community of practice is really designed by the people that show up. So whoever shows up gets to decide what the group talks about. Think of it kind of like a book group, discussion group type thing.
Ashley, are you muted?
Oh, that was me.
I absolutely was. I was saying that, and that session's going to be next Friday at 10 o'clock, right, Mark?
Correct. Yeah.
Well, all right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Good luck in this final week of classes. If you have any questions, reach out, and we hope you have a great weekend.
Mark, you saw that Miriam is interested in the COP, right?
Yeah.
I think she'd be such a great person for it, too.
And that's Miriam Holtzclaw, right?
Hey guys, I'm
Yes.
sorry, I was embarrassed to ask. Where are all these recorded sessions? How do I have access?
We have to link them out for you.
Ah,
Yeah, because we're the instructors in the DEIR class, you don't have the ability to go back in and search them, but we will link today's session out for you.
and where do I find that?
We'll post it in the course, and we can send an email to you, Tracy, just to double check that you have it.
Okay,
We
thank you.
don't have a place that we typically always stick them, so we'll send you the link.
Okay, thank you, Ashley.
You're welcome. Cameron and Mark, I did actually turn on the attendance tool for this session so that we wouldn't have to go back in and manually enter in any of that information.
Excellent.
I was very afraid to turn it on though, because I was like, I know with the Quickly tool that it'll automatically send out a notification if you turn it on to students who have missed it. And I was like, I don't want to accidentally send out, 137 emails to people that they missed today's Collaborate session. But hopefully it'll integrate into the gradebook, or we can, in that initial panel when you're logging into a Collaborate session at the top, it's got like a gear, a door, and whatever the far right option is, that should show us an attendance report for who came today. And also, I completely forgot that we were going to cover how master courses, like it slipped my mind as I was talking about all these functions in the gradebook.
That was a lot of information. That was kind of